Welcome to the Zandbergen Report, where wealth strategies and pop culture collide, featuring your distinguished host and certified financial planner, Bart Zandbergen.
So Dr. Teryn Clarke is a board-certified neurologist and has been in private practice in Orange County, California since 2003. She was selected as the Alzheimer's Foundation of America's Dementia Care Professional of the Year in 2015. Her current focus is on developing proactive strategies for brain wellness. She bridges the gap between science and everyday living, translating complex research findings in practical, actionable advice that anyone can incorporate into their daily routine. Welcome to the show, Dr. Clarke.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So I think let's start. I have a question you to start with. What is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease?
It's such a great question. I find that it can be really confusing because the lay press tends to use those terms interchangeably, and they aren't the same. They don't mean the same thing. So when we think about dementia, it's really describing a way somebody's functioning. So that means they might not be able to do the things they used to do, like drive a car, pay the bills every month, file their taxes. And so then the question when somebody's functioning at that level is, what's causing them to function at that level? Is it a disease? Is it a metabolic problem, a vitamin deficiency, something like that? And so I think of it like the flu and a fever. So dementia is like a fever. So if you went to the doctor with a fever and they said, yeah, your diagnosis is fever, and sent you on your way, you'd be really disappointed because you're hoping to find out what's causing it so you can do something about it. And it's the same with dementia. When somebody has memory changes, even if they're not severe enough to cause dementia, but maybe a prodromal period called mild cognitive function, where they're just forgetful, but they're able to do everything. Then the question is, what's causing that? And Alzheimer's disease is one of the diseases that can cause people to develop dementia. So that's more like the flu. So the flu isn't the only cause of fever, although it's a really common one. And similarly, Alzheimer's disease isn't the only cause of dementia, although it is really kind of the big elephant in the room. It is responsible for a lot of the cases of dementia.
So dementia is the characteristic or the symptom.
It's the symptom, exactly. And then we've got to figure out what's causing it so we can treat it, reverse it, hopefully, if it's a reversible reason. Some things like vitamin B12 deficiency, it's reversible if we catch that early.
Oh, that's great.
So, yep.
Is it hereditary? If your parents or grandparents have Alzheimer's or dementia, is one more apt to have it?
There is a hereditary component. There's a genetic component. And some of those genetics we can measure. But the largest part of developing Alzheimer's disease seems to be environmental. And what I mean by that is I've seen people in my practice who have really terrible genetics for Alzheimer's disease. And they definitely should have been showing signs, if we're looking at the statistics, of Alzheimer's disease-related dementia by the time they were 80. And yet they'll come into my practice at almost 90 with barely any symptoms just starting. And those lifestyle patterns that are usually associated with that are people who happen to be a marathon runner and they're still walking 5Ks in their late 80s, never had much of a sweet tooth. They always tend to be people who enjoyed exercise. They don't have to be a marathon runner, but that particular patient stands out to me as remarkable. But they always had an exercise habit that they enjoyed, and they didn't tend to have a sweet tooth. So without knowing it, they were living a brain healthy lifestyle, which pushed off the manifestation of their genetics longer than we would have expected.
Is the opposite true as well? If someone does not have the genetics and they do not have the proper lifestyle, i.e. maybe don't exercise or overeat sugar, could that lead towards?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of people who develop Alzheimer's disease and don't have any measurable genetic risk factors. And some of the lifestyles, things you suggested, like high sugar, we're filling up our bodies with oxidants, which, we know is just harmful for every system, leads to inflammation. It's bad for the heart, the brain, every organ suffers from high sugar intake. So we can definitely do ourselves in with our lifestyle, even if we didn't have any sort of family history.
So let's talk a little bit about the lifestyle and habits, what things are good and what things are not so good. couple of what we just covered, reduce our sugar. I think it's impossible to eliminate, but reduce, right? Minimal
Right,
amount.
exactly. Yep.
Exercise is a choice. Right?
Yes.
So what other things are we looking at?
So I agree. And I think just to have your listeners not be terrified, the approach in the book is really moderate, making tiny changes bit by bit, because I realize that we can't go from the typical lifestyle we have to no sugar. And so things I recommend are, for example, getting to the American Heart Association guidelines for sugar. So just cutting back and making mindful choices, getting rid of just some of the unenjoyable sources of sugar so we can have a treat when we like it. It's Christmas toffee season for me, and I'm going to be enjoying that. So that means I'm probably not loading up on, Starbucks mochas and other things that are not as enjoyable. But a lot of the other lifestyle choices are things your mom probably told you. Getting a good night's sleep, managing stress. I guess in a nutshell, we could say really most of the characteristics of the modern lifestyle are not that consistent with our original design. So wherever we're looking at, how we do things today compared to maybe how they did them in the 50s, there are a lot of healthier habits that date back to then, other than exercise, because women didn't really exercise that much in the 50s. But, managing stress, meditating or prayer, sleep, and then being sure that we're keeping up on general health issues, because all of those general medical concerns, high blood pressure, they all also affect the brain.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I'm thinking I've studied a lot about the heart lately and heart health, and there's a lot of consistency between what you're saying with the brain and with the heart as well.
Yeah, exactly. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. And that's why I have my patients follow the American Heart Association guidelines for added sugar, because I think they're spot on for brain health. And I think, people can be successful staying within those guidelines. They're not impossible.
Yeah.
So, if we set a bar of 0 added sugar, then most everybody's going to fail, except for a couple, and then we're going to lose steam, and it really makes a difference. Even I think in the way, especially you being a financial planner, I think of it a lot as like saving for your retirement. If you start, I've seen some of those graphs, and I'm not particularly a numbers person, so forgive me, but when you start supposedly in your 20s and 30s, you see the graphs, you save just a tiny bit, and by the time you're 80, you're like a multimillionaire.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but if you start at 60 and you're going to retire at 65, you really have to make a dramatic change in your life to save enough money. And if you start to save for your retirement once you're retired, it's clearly too late. Sure. And it's really the same with brain health. So we can make a difference once people already have a memory problem, but it's going to take a lot of intervention, and it's not going to produce that big of a result. Yeah. Where if we make a little change in our sugar, for example, I keep hitting on that, but it's just an easy one to talk about, especially this time of year. If you make a minor change in your 20s and 30s and then live that lifestyle, it's going to pay massive dividends in brain health later.
I almost hate to ask this question, being a lover of wine, but wine does have sugar, and there seems to be a trend, especially with the newer generations, that they're drinking less alcohol. I know that some of the wineries are having some issues because the sales volume isn't what it once used to be. What is your position on alcohol and brain health? Is there a healthy tolerant level?
Well, it has shifted, and I agree with you. There's a big sobriety trend in millennials, and maybe a little bit up to Gen Z, up to Gen X even a little bit. And it's amazing that it's having an impact on the wine industry. I'm surprised to hear that. I hadn't realized that it was that dramatic. The mantra used to be 2 drinks a day is the healthy amount. Right. And more than that is not healthy, and less than that is not healthy. And when I would give talks about brain health, I would always get the question, well, if I don't drink, should I start drinking 2 drinks a day? And I never knew how to answer that because there's no data that would suggest that we should. But it's interesting as the literature evolves and we get more data, it looks like that cutoff of 2 drinks a day is probably too much, that 14 drinks a week is not associated, is not optimal for brain health. And so anywhere you are around that there's a benefit to cutting down. So if people are at 2 a day, to cut to 1 a day, or maybe cut out a couple days a week, it does show a benefit. So I don't know if I would recommend everybody try to go to abstinence. I don't think that's realistic, but I think cutting down from wherever they are will show a brain health benefit.
I know that through your book you talk about some like hacking ideas that you have.
Yeah, I love to just find simple hacks that I can remember to do because I don't want to overwhelm people and I don't want to overwhelm myself. And so my 3 hacks that I've been working on this year that are all really focused around modern lifestyle are just my interrupting strategy. So I'm trying to interrupt 3 things. I'm trying to interrupt sedentariness, I'm trying to interrupt stress, and I'm trying to interrupt cravings. And for me, that's sweet cravings. So in terms of sedentariness, the reason that that's kind of a magical brain health hack is that when our muscles contract, they release these hormones called myokines, which I wrote about in the book and explained. But those hormones actually, one of them goes to the brain and helps our nerves or our neurons survive and helps support the new neurons we're growing. So there's a direct connection between muscle movement and brain health. And we knew that exercise was good for the brain, but now we know exactly why. It's because of these little hormones. And so there was another study too that showed they compared people who didn't exercise. They broke them into 2 groups. One of the non-exercisers, they had to exercise an hour a day. And the other group of non-exercisers had to just get up and move for 2 minutes every half an hour throughout the day. And they actually found that the people who moved 2 minutes throughout the day, even though the total they were exercising between the 2 groups was the same, they had more of a health benefit. So it turns out when you're sedentary, your muscles just get quiescent. They go to sleep and they stop producing altogether. So I'm really making an effort, although I do usually exercise an hour a day. In addition to that, when I'm finding myself sedentary, sitting at my desk, I do try to get up every half an hour. Or if I get up to go to the bathroom, I'll walk up and down the stairs 3 or 4 times. And I like to do a bunch of squats because those are big muscle movements. You get a lot of myokine release out of those guys. And it just keeps your muscles from going back to sleep in between.
I love that.
Yeah. And it's easy to do. I mean, you don't have to sweat in those 2 minutes, but it's pretty easy to incorporate. And then my second one, in terms of interrupting stress, because we're stressed out all the time. Every time we pick up our phone, there's a text or an email that can bring up some emotion. Trying to take a couple deep breaths, like breaths into my stomach, through my mouth, through my nose. When you breathe deeply, you expand the lower part of your lungs, and that actually triggers your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and relaxation. So it switches us from that fight or flight sympathetic just with a couple breaths, and it's immediate. Your heart rate will slow down. So I also try to remind myself throughout the day to literally take 15 seconds. I can do it in the middle of, I could probably just do it here when nobody even notices that you're just getting this break from stress. So that's helpful. And then my third little hack that I'm working on is just trying to interrupt my sweet cravings because they're all around. And our sweet craving is actually evolutionarily, it's our craving for fruit and all of the healthy compounds that are in fruit. So usually when we have a sweet craving, if we have a fresh fruit, it will satisfy that craving. And so I either try to interrupt whatever I want, unless it's toffee. This is my time of year. I told you this is my exception.
You have a sweet tooth, don't you?
I have a sweet tooth, and my grandmother, who lived to be 100, made the best toffee ever, and she passed along that recipe. So this time of year, there's a lot of toffee baking in our kitchen, so there's a lot of access to it. But I try to interrupt that by having a fruit, which usually then I'm less likely to have the toffee anyway.
Okay.
And sometimes as we're moving through life, which is kind of code word for aging, but our sensors for hunger change. Our sensor for thirst goes way down to the point that when we're seniors, it's almost non-existent. And a lot of seniors end up in the emergency room dehydrated, and they're still not thirsty. They're just dry as a bone, and they're still not thirsty because that sensor is just not active. So a lot of times a sweet craving is actually a crossed wire where we're actually thirsty and dehydrated. So I interrupt sweet cravings by fruit or a lot of times just a glass of water.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I find my body was actually craving the water. I didn't really need a sweet. I just was dehydrated. So those are the little hacks I'm working on now. And none of them are really very interruptive into my day.
Yeah. So I just have to say, I have a little PTSD when it comes to toffee.
Oh, okay.
Because last Christmas, it was around this time last year.
Yep.
And we'd received some sort of gift basket, and it had one of my favorite flavors is like cappuccino or espresso, and it was a cappuccino flavored toffee.
Oh, yum.
Great, right? So, and I don't have a sweet tooth actually, other than wine. So I'm like, this sounds really good. I'm going to have it. I popped a crown. I pulled a crown.
Oh, no. Oh, my gosh.
So I spent Christmas missing a tooth, waiting to get into the dentist.
Oh, that's awful.
If you're thinking about sending us toffees, I'm probably not going to have it.
Okay, I will. Noted.
But the rest of the crew might. But speaking of cappuccino and espresso, that's another, I'm not going to say a modern vice, but it's definitely been a developed world vice. How does that affect brain? I've heard both on that, from a fitness level, from a brain level. The brain loves a little caffeine, gets going. It needs a cup a day, or 100 milligrams a day.
Right.
And then I've heard lately too, both from heart and brain, nope, no coffee is the best choice. What's your opinion?
It's so interesting. So I think that coffee and chocolate are two things that go back and forth constantly, and they make for great clickbait because most people like one of the two of them or both. So I'm a huge coffee drinker, so I stay up on the literature for that. Yeah. For people who drink coffee, it's generally their number one source of antioxidants in their diet. So in that regard, it's really healthy. The caffeine, true, it is. It's a performance enhancer, both mentally and physically. So there are some great attributes of coffee and caffeinated coffee as well. I think the literature where it really starts to point to harm from caffeine and coffee is with excess. Yeah. So I think as long as people are staying closer to 2 cups a day, that's probably a safe amount. I drink probably 4 cups a day because it's 2 mugs, and actually a mug,
There's 2 cups. Yeah.
Yeah. When you
In
really
America,
talk about that. Exactly.
In Europe, it's.
Yes, exactly. So I'm probably having 4 European cups. But I think the thing to be careful always when talking about coffee is that we're really talking about coffee and maybe a little of a natural creamer. I'm not talking about
that's an issue too.
A milkshake for breakfast, like a Frappuccino thing.
That's an issue.
So yeah, so that really is a big issue.
Yeah.
A lot of the coffee drinks, even the hot coffee drinks, not just the milkshakes, they have as much sugar as a McDonald's hot fudge sundae. Yes, and we would never start our day with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, whoever was the genius who thought like we can just market milkshakes for breakfast for $6 or $7 a pop. I mean, that was, of course, people are going to want a milkshake for breakfast and get very addicted to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, those just need to be treated as a dessert. And so if it's a day where somebody's having a treat, having a mocha, chai latte, whatever it is, like that's kind of the sweet for the day. It's just a non-dessert day. Yeah. It's no dessert after dinner kind of thing.
Right.
So, and with the wine, I'm kind of the same. People can just pick and choose what they enjoy. Maybe today is a wine day, and tomorrow will be a dessert day. We live in such abundance. It's not that we're never going to have a chance to have that chocolate cookie another day. Yeah, or like Haagen-Dazs is going to be available tomorrow also. So, I just think of it as like casual cookies. I try to avoid, when you go to the bank and there's like the Costco cookies sitting on, like they're not really good. Yeah. It's just boredom. You just waste passing time. Yeah. If my daughter makes, a batch of cookies from scratch, I'm probably gonna have those chocolate chip cookies. Yeah. But just being mindful, like, is this even good? Like,
is it worth it?
Is it worth it? And the more I dug into the literature, it really framed everything for me that way. Yeah. So I'll enjoy a sweet, but I really have to enjoy it.
Yeah. And I think that the same could be said for wine. You go to an event, they're serving, wine in a plastic cup, and it's wine out of a box. You're really going to waste your
totally. That's such a good point.
Yeah.
That's such a good point.
I want to go back to your comments about exercise, and it made me think, I think it's important to exercise the brain as well as the body for brain health. Don't you?
It is, absolutely. So when you exercise your brain, I mean, it all comes down to our understanding that the higher education level people have, the more protective that is against Alzheimer's disease. But we oversimplified that. It doesn't just mean education, how far you went in school. And the benefit is because when you're thinking really hard, you increase blood flow to your brain. Brings more oxygen, takes out more toxins. So we can keep doing that throughout life, and we should. So people who have a really demanding job, they're doing that. They don't really have to build separate time to exercise their brain. But if people are kind of slowing down, winding down, or retiring, then we do need to make a conscientious effort to build in some brain exercise. And it can be a lot of different things. The richest ones would be, taking a class, revisiting a language somebody used to speak, learning a new instrument, anything like that. Yeah. But we can also do kind of these multivitamin approaches, which are the online ones that run you through exercising all the different parts of your brain. If people like to do crosswords, that's great. And people tend to only do the things they're really good at already. So that part of the brain gets a lot of exercise. But we want to push people through the uncomfortable parts, or the parts that aren't as developed or aren't really their wheelhouse. So those little online courses, I think, are great for that. And they track your progress, which is kind of motivating, kind of gamifies the whole thing, which is helpful.
Yeah. So, you mentioned retirement, and it made me think. I've been doing this, a lot of years, and I've seen people retire, some earlier, some later. And it's interesting, some that I've seen, and I can recall that have retired early, and then I can see their cognitive ability over time start to decrease because they just haven't been exercising their brain, my opinion, which I think is really an argument for, like, me. I love what I do, so why not just keep doing it? And I'm exercising my brain maybe too much every day, but I think it's helpful in the long run for so many reasons.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would imagine most of your listeners have witnessed that as well. And it's consistent with what the medical data shows. There's a huge study in Italy based on retirement age and development of Alzheimer's. So it really is important. If you like what you do and you can keep doing it, we've all seen people who are 85, 90 years old working and sharp as a tack. So, if you like it, great. If you're going to retire, just be sure you build in something challenging for your brain.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
What makes your book different versus the other books on Alzheimer's on the market today?
That's a great question. So I really designed it so it would be approachable. I don't think there's a shortage of really thick books with a ton of the medical data and literature in there, but no way to incorporate that, what we know about brain health. And so my goal here was to give people a background of the science and explain why it's important, because I think that's motivating when you see like the direct connection between the muscles and the brain. It's really easy to understand why we have to exercise. But then I took the next step of making lists so people can build their own action plan at the end of every chapter. So just making tiny, tiny changes week by week, instead of just giving like a ton of medical information and then like, how do I do all that? It can be very defeating because it's too dramatic. So I hope that it's approachable and people can make little changes, and it could take people a month to work through the book. It could take a couple months or a year, and that's fine. Everybody's on their own schedule.
Sure. So my hack was I printed your action plan from the book.
Oh, perfect.
And it is really good. I mean, it's simple to follow, and I like that you do it in small steps, right? Because to me, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think how you've done this is in that kind of that same format.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
Sure. Anything else in the book that you'd want to cover today?
One thing that's really highlighted in the book, and I think it's worth mentioning, is a lot of Alzheimer's is related to inflammation. And so much of our modern lifestyle is triggering that inflammation in our gut, in our brain, in our heart. And so I think that if your listeners read the book, I mean, the nice thing is making these changes will pay dividends in health throughout their body, because really a lot of the interventions are aimed at that central kind of core of inflammation.
We talked a little about this before, and you and I are both, I think, in the exploratory change, but I think we should at least address it because it's kind of a buzzword now. EMFs, electromagnetic field?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Better get that right.
Sounds right.
There seems to be a lot of buzz about that being harmful for many things, heart, brain.
Yeah, buzz, literally.
Buzz, yeah. Good use of words. So for you, it's still under exploratory?
Yes, I haven't made a decision about what I think about that yet, and it's mostly just due to a lack of focusing research on it so far. So I think the data is probably out there. I haven't dug into it as thoroughly as I'd like to. And part of that is I'm probably a little bit intimidated by it because I know if I find that we have to protect ourselves from it, it's so overwhelming. And then I'll have to figure out how to do that. So I know it's such a huge topic and it's so ubiquitous. But that will be something I'm looking into. My next book is going to be kind of all the next steps beyond this. It's Brain Wellness Action Plan. So looking at some of the EMFs, sauna, cold plunge, all that next step of kind of interventions. Yeah.
Even those seem to be, beyond EMFs, the sauna, which I'm a big fan of, cold plunge, which I can't get myself to do.
I can't get myself to do it either. And from what I've looked into so far, it is very beneficial. I just can't bring myself to do it.
But actually, and this is somewhat brain related, could be brain and heart. I've heard both sides. And the negative side is putting yourself in that cold environment, put yourself, brain, heart, in a fight or flight.
Right.
And it's detrimental to your health for that reason, and premature ages for that. I don't know if that's true. It's something.
Yeah, I'm interested to sort it out because part of it is that it shocks the system and has us release these proteins that are called shock proteins, which can go around and repair the body. So I am excited to look into that and understand better the balance between the harms and benefits of it.
I hope it turns out that it's more harmful than good.
I know, me too.
Don't want to take up that and try everything, but that's a tough one.
It is a tough one. I'm not sure. I think there's micro ways to get it. Even, switching the water to cold in the shower, intermittently back and forth between hot. But the couple times I've done it, I keep giving up on that too.
Yeah, I tried it once.
Yeah, some of these are tough. So, I think that's also where I think about, well, the earlier you do things, the bigger benefit. And so if I do a lot of things that aren't really impossible to do, maybe I can skip one of those two that for me are just a no-go. And that's okay. We all have to live, so.
Okay, a couple questions for you. If you could put a message on a billboard, what would that be?
You have more control over whether or not you're going to get Alzheimer's disease than you think.
I'm going to ask another one, but I think it's so related that it might be the same answer. But, in your career as a neurologist, what would you say is your ultimate lesson learned?
It's different. I would say my ultimate lesson learned is that preventative medicine is really how we take care of our body, not the pills we get from the doctor's office. Mm-hmm. That's been a big shift. I think when I went to medical school, I thought preventative medicine was, taking a statin for cholesterol and pills for blood pressure. And I've really come to realize that it starts way before that, starts at the dinner table. So
yeah, that's great information. There seems to be more of an awareness of that in the last even just couple of years from what I can see. Yeah,
and it's really empowering. People are in charge of their bodies, and I think that people are even having a better sense that when they go to their doctor, they do know their body best.
Yeah.
So, themselves better than their doctor. So I think people are empowered, and that's fantastic.
Right. Well, Dr. Clarke, how can people reach you? How can people find your book?
The book's on Amazon. It's Brain Health Action Plan, and the website is brainhealthactionplan.com.
Wonderful. Well, you've been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me. I love spreading the word of good brain health.
Of course. I think this is brain health and just general health. So thank you so much. We were excited to be in the studio today. Look forward to be back next week. Have a great week. Cheers.
Tune in next week for the latest edition of the Zandbergen Report, Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Catch up on our recent shows by visiting podcast.bartzandbergen.com. The Zandbergen Report is also available on iTunes, iHeartRadio and Spotify. Interested in being a featured guest on our show or have a question you'd like to hear us answer? Email podcast@bartzandbergen.com. The contents of this podcast episode do not constitute an offer of securities or a solicitation of an offer to buy securities and may not be relied upon in making an investment decision related to any investment offering Access Wealth Management LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Access does not warrant the accuracy or completeness of the information contained herein. Opinions are our current opinions and are subject to change without notice. Prices, quotes, rates are subject to change without notice. Generally, investments are not FDIC insured, not bank guaranteed, and may lose value.